The last form I want to consider is the purchase order. Requisitions were on standard forms. A requisition had to be filled out by the responsible quartermaster officer and authorized by the commanding officer of the particular command unit. An interesting example occurred when Perkins was in Gallipolis, Ohio, in spring of 1864. Now, I know that this is outside of my time frame, but when you hear the names, you will understand why I wanted its inclusion. He received a number of requisitions for the 23rd Ohio Infantry. These were submitted by Lieutenant William McKinley, the unit's regimental quartermaster. And, get this, they were signed by none other than Rutherford B. Hayes, the commander of the regiment. These documents are unique and very valuable, as they contain the only known samples of both future presidents' signature on the same item. There is a further benefit that accrues once you speed up an information system. You can make a trade-off of information for stuff. My entire professional career, I developed, sold, and implemented logistical control software. Much of this was inventory control, as we have been discussing all evening. And what is the object of inventory control? It is to accomplish the mission, be that a lean manufacturing company or an army. If you know what the demands for stuff are, you can hold back the goods and ship them just in time to where they are needed. Think about this for a minute. Without a rapid reaction system, a depot might have to supply 2 units who might go into combat with 2 complete sets of materials. With a rapid reaction system, you may need only to supply 1 unit. Then, sometimes later, you might ship the excess to the second unit. Thus, overall amount of stuff is far smaller. You have traded information for stuff. That is all well and good for modern times. How did this inventory theory work out during the Civil War? At the end of July 1862, Perkins was supplying Buell's army in northern Alabama using railroad connections from Nashville to Decatur, Alabama. When the railroad service was disrupted, he was forced to reroute his supplies using telegraph messages. Instead of storing all the supplies in forward areas where Buell's army might go, he could ship the goods a long distance and keep changing the destination as Buell shifted position. He could do this even when his supply line was interdicted by enemy action, when Buell's supply officers made errors in their orders, and when others made demands on theater inventories. What Perkins was doing was trading information for stuff. If you have the information, you might not need the stuff. Let me tell a second story that ends with a touch of humor. In the fall of 1862, Colonel Thomas Swords was the assistant quartermaster general in Cincinnati. The famous rebel marauder John Hunt Morgan greatly disrupted supply operations in the area of Bardstown, Kentucky, not too far from Louisville. I have mentioned on October 19th, Morgan captured 82 wagons. Swords received a wire for help in replacing the lost material. He replaced the wagons and livestock quickly, shipping them over water rather than the cheaper method of driving them overland. I am in hopes of soon being able to supply all the wagons required if John Morgan doesn't take too many, he exclaimed. I can hardly supply the wants of both ours and the rebel army without knowing how many they are to have. All humor aside, Swords was able to do this because he had the information almost at once. From the inventory data and the wagon train bills of lading, he knew what he had lost and what he needed to replace. Because he knew what his barge status was, he knew what he could do. Real-time inventory management. Let me give you a 1-minute lesson on inventory control. It's all about levels and flows. An accountant would reflect the level of an asset, like rifles in a depot, on the balance sheet. It is the number of weapons you have at any one instant of time. Contrast that with the income statement that reflects the flow of stock during a period of time bounded by a start time and an ending time. For example, how many rifles were received during the month of March 1862? The reports Documents, telegraph transmissions, and verbal communications about inventory have one or both of these concepts at the heart of the control mechanism. You can read this into Sword's droll comment. Taylor relates that Simon Perkins had a natural talent for accurate record keeping. He probably acquired this gift from his business experience before the war. Sometimes this passion for detail, which infected the entire quartermaster department, reached ridiculous ends. Take, for example, the Great Gunny Sack Return Program. Meigs introduced a cost-saving measure in August of 1861. He ordered the recycling of gunny sacks used to hold animal feed. His reasoning was that the reuse of grain sacks that cost 7 cents each 3 or 4 times would save the government money. By the summer of 1862, Meigs ordered Swords, who ordered Perkins, to return empty gunny sacks to Louisville for reuse. This was folly because the cost of collecting, returning, and accounting for the bags overwhelmed the savings. Think of the manpower and transportation costs involved. All this was going on with an army in the field whose location was constantly changing. Keeping up with empty gunny sacks and returning them to the appropriate supply officers would have been an onerous task for a unit that remained in one place, let alone an army on the march.